London, 1803. The chandeliers of Almac's assembly rooms poured golden light across the polished dance floor, where the cream of society whirled in perfect harmony. At the heart of the glittering spectacle, 3 radiant young women held court, each wearing the self-assured glow of a brilliantly married woman. The Thomas sisters, all wed to titled lords within 3 remarkable seasons, with a triumph everyone whispered about. Yet near the marble columns at the room's edge, Rose Thomas stood alone in her simple rose-colored gown. At 28, she had long since accepted her place in the shadows. Not that anyone would guess she was the architect of her sister's dazzling success. "Your sisters shine like stars tonight," came a familiar voice. Rose turned to find Mrs. Pemberton, an old friend of her late mother, observing her with knowing eyes. "They do indeed. Each season has brought another blessed match." Rose's reply was practiced, gracious, and yet Mrs. Pemberton's voice dropped. "I wonder if anyone remembers that it was your inheritance, every penny from your maternal grandmother, that funded their debuts and secured their futures." Rose's fingers tightened imperceptibly on her fan. Few knew the truth. The money, her prospects, her very future, all sacrificed to the altar of family duty. "One does what one must," Rose said quietly. "Welcome back, my amazing family. I'm thrilled to have you here, and I hope you're ready for another incredible story. Before we jump in, I want to ask for your help with something important. We're working toward a big goal, reaching 1,000 subscribers, and I can't do it without you. If you're enjoying what you see here, please take a quick moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support doesn't just help us hit that milestone. It fuels my passion to bring you even more captivating and interesting stories. Every single subscriber matters, and I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you for being part of this journey. Now, let's get into today's story. Mrs. Pemberton's expression darkened. "My dear, I fear duty may demand even more. Your father's latest investment venture has collapsed entirely. The West Indies scheme was his last hope. Whispers of insolvency are already circulating among the creditors." The word struck like a blow. Rose had known her father, Baron Thomas, was reckless with money, had watched him spiral deeper into debt since her mother's death. But she had believed, hoped, that settling her sisters would be enough, that her sacrifice would end there. "Then there is nothing left," Rose whispered. "Nothing but the Beaumont name itself, hanging by the thinnest thread. One public scandal, one whisper reaching the wrong ears, and everything you built for your sisters crumbles to dust." Across the ballroom, Rose caught sight of her father, his face flushed with wine, laughing too loudly among a circle of gentlemen. At 56, Baron Thomas still possessed the handsome features that had once charmed society, though years of excess had carved lines of weakness into his countenance. Since her mother's passing, he had sought refuge in cards and schemes, each venture more disastrous than the last. "I will speak with him," Rose said, though even she could hear the futility in her voice. "Speak with him? My dear girl, what can you possibly do that you haven't already done? You've given everything." The orchestra swelled into a new waltz, and then silence. The dancers slowed, conversations died mid-sentence, and every head turned toward the ballroom entrance. The crowd parted as though an invisible hand had swept them aside. "The Duke of Ashworth," the footman announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly breathless room. Clifton Hardin, the 4th Duke of Ashworth, stood framed in the grand archway, and the very air seemed to bend around him. At 33, he commanded attention not merely through his ancient title, one of the most powerful in England, but through the formidable, almost intimidating presence he carried like armor. His dark hair was impeccably styled, emphasizing the aristocratic severity of his features and the penetrating coldness of his steel-gray eyes. There was something profoundly remote about him, as though he existed on a plane separate from ordinary humanity. Extraordinary, Mrs. Pemberton breathed. His Grace hasn't attended a public assembly in 2 years. Not since the Teresa Juanita scandal. Rose watched the ripple of calculation sweep through the room. Mothers straightened, daughters preened, ambitious matrons maneuvered their charges into strategic positions. Lady Penelope is positioned perfectly, someone whispered nearby. Surely he's come to finally choose a duchess. A duke of his stature doesn't marry for love, came the reply. He'll want breeding, connections, and discretion. Rose observed the duke's progress through the crowd, acknowledging nods with the barest inclination of his head, deflecting greetings with glacial politeness, engaging with no one. His movements were precise, controlled, as though emotion itself was an enemy to be conquered. Your father is about to humiliate himself, Mrs. Pemberton hissed suddenly. Rose's heart plummeted. Baron Thomas was weaving his way toward the Duke, his gait unsteady, desperation written across his wine-flushed features. "Excuse me," Rose murmured, moving swiftly to intercept. She reached her father just as he extended a hand toward the Duke's imposing figure. "Father," she said quietly, grasping his arm with gentle firmness. "Perhaps we might—" "Not now, Rose," he muttered, attempting to shake her off. "Can't you see? Ashworth is here. This is our chance." But the Duke's cold gray eyes had already found them. For one terrible, suspended moment, his gaze passed over the Baron's flushed face, taking the situation with merciless clarity. Then impossibly his attention shifted to Rose. The Duke of Ashworth's gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that stole her breath. The ballroom seemed to recede, the music fading to nothing as he moved, not away from the Baron's embarrassment, but directly toward it, toward her. Every eye in the assembly room followed his progress. Whispers erupted like wildfire. He stopped before her, his towering presence both intimidating and strangely magnetic. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, and carried the weight of absolute authority. "Miss Thomas." Not a question, a statement. He knew exactly who she was. Rose's pulse thundered in her ears, but years of composure held firm. "Your Grace, I wonder if I might impose upon you for a moment of your time tomorrow afternoon. There's a matter of some importance I wish to discuss. Privately." The ballroom had gone utterly silent. Even the orchestra had ceased playing. Rose's mind raced. A matter of importance? Privately? The most powerful, most notoriously detached duke in all of England was requesting to call upon her. The spinster eldest daughter, the forgotten sacrifice, the woman society had long since dismissed. "Aye, yes, Your Grace. That would be acceptable." Something flickered in his cold eyes. Not warmth precisely, but perhaps acknowledgment, recognition of something he saw in her. 3:00, then. "Good evening, Miss Thomas." He inclined his head with perfect formality, then turned and departed as abruptly as he had arrived, leaving chaos in his wake. The whispers exploded. Rose stood frozen, her heart hammering, her father staring at her in bewildered shock, and Mrs. Pemberton clutching her arm with barely contained astonishment. What had just happened? And more terrifyingly, what would the Duke of Ashworth want with her? The morning after the assembly, Rose sat in her father's study, the ledger spread before her like accusations. The numbers told a story more damning than any gossip. Debts totaling nearly £15,000, creditors circling like vultures, and assets worth perhaps a tenth of what was owed. Her father had not exaggerated. They were ruined. "We might sell the townhouse," Baron Thomas said from his chair, though his voice carried no conviction. "Or perhaps appeal to your sister's husbands for loans." "Father, we cannot." Rose's tone was gentle but firm. "The moment we approach them, the scandal becomes public. Their own positions would be jeopardized by association with our insolvency." He slumped deeper into his chair, suddenly looking every one his 56 years. Rose felt a familiar surge of protective exhaustion. She had modeled this man since her own mother's death, managed what she could, salvaged what remained. But there was nothing left to salvage now. The clock struck 3, and Rose's heart lurched. She had nearly forgotten. When the Duke of Ashworth was announced, he entered the drawing room like winter itself, cold, inevitable, and absolute. Rose rose from her chair, her hands clasped to hide their trembling. Her father had made himself scarce, whether from shame or calculation. She couldn't say. "Miss Thomas." The Duke's bow was perfunctory, correct. "Thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace." Rose gestured to Sati. Though he remained standing, his presence dominating the modest room. The morning light from the window cast his features in sharp relief. Handsome in a severe way, but utterly devoid of warmth. "I will be direct, as I imagine you prefer clarity to pleasant artifice." His gray eyes held hers without a trace of emotion. "I am aware of your family's financial circumstances, the full extent of them." Shame burned through Rose's chest, but she lifted her chin. "Then you have the advantage of me, your Grace, for I cannot fathom why you concern yourself with our affairs." "Because I require a wife." The words fell like stones. "And you, Miss Thomas, require salvation from complete social and financial annihilation. I propose we address both needs through a marriage of strict convenience." Rose's breath caught. Of all the possibilities she had imagined, this had not been among them. "I don't understand." "I need a duchess," he continued, his tone suggesting he was outlining a business contract rather than a proposal of marriage. "Someone competent, intelligent, and mature enough to manage my households and fulfill the social obligations of my position without troublesome romantic expectations. You need your family's debts cleared and your father's reputation salvaged before the creditors move to public action. The arrangement would be mutually beneficial." "Mutually beneficial," Rose repeated slowly, the words tasting like ash. "You speak as though you're proposing a merger of estates, not a marriage." "I am proposing precisely that." His expression remained unchanged. "I will settle your father's debts in their entirety, provide a generous annual allowance for your family's maintenance, and restore the Thomas name to respectability. In return, you will serve as the Duchess of Ashworth, manage my properties, host my social obligations, and provide the appearance of a stable, respectable union. Nothing more will be required of you. Nothing more." The coldness of it stole her breath. Rose moved a window, needing distance from his overwhelming presence. In the street below, ordinary life continued, vendors calling their wares, children playing, the world turning as though her entire existence wasn't tilting on its axis. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "You could have anyone. A younger woman, a more accomplished woman. I do not want anyone else." His voice cut through her words with surgical precision. "Younger women harbor romantic illusions I have no intention of indulging. Accomplished women seek social power and emotional entanglement. You, Miss Thomas, have already sacrificed everything for your family's welfare. You understand duty. You will not expect what I cannot give." Rose turned to face him, and in that moment she saw it, the truth beneath his glacial composure. This was a man who had been wounded, who had built walls so high that nothing could scale them. He wasn't offering marriage. He was offering a fortress of mutual isolation. "And what if I refuse?" The question was barely a whisper. "Then your father will be in debtor's prison within the month. Your sister's marriages will be tainted by association, and you will have the satisfaction of having maintained your principles while your family burns." The brutality of his honesty was almost admirable. No false promises, no pretty words, just the stark mathematics of survival. Rose thought of her sisters, laughing, radiant, secure in their marriages because of her sacrifice. She thought her father, weak and foolish, but still her father. She thought of the years she had already given, the future she had already surrendered. What was one more sacrifice? I accept your proposal, your grace. Her voice was steady, though her heart felt like lead, on the condition that my family never knows the true nature of our arrangement. Let them believe what they will. Something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or recognition. Agreed. I will have my solicitors draw up the settlements immediately. We will marry within the fortnight. He moved toward the door, then paused. You should understand, Miss Thomas, that I am not a cruel man, merely a practical one. I will treat you with respect and ensure your comfort, but I cannot offer you affection or companionship beyond what public appearances demand. If you harbor any hope that this arrangement might evolve into something more tender, I advise you to abandon it now. Rose met his gaze with equal coldness. Your Grace, I abandon hope for tenderness the day I spend my last shilling on my youngest sister's wedding trousseau. We understand each other perfectly. For the first time, the Duke of Ashworth smiled, a thin, mirthless expression that held no joy whatsoever. Then we have an accord. When he left, Rose sank onto the settee, her composure finally cracking. She had just agreed to marry the most powerful duke in England, and felt exactly like stepping into a beautiful, gilded cage. The door would lock behind her in a fortnight. The announcement in the Morning Post was brief and impeccably worded. His Grace the Duke of Ashworth to Miss Rose Thomas, eldest daughter of Baron Thomas. Society erupted in speculation. How had the forgotten spinster captured England's most elusive duke? The whispers ranged from secret love affair to cunning entrapment, none landing anywhere near the cold truth. Rose's sisters descended upon the townhouse in a flurry of silken excitement, their joy so genuine it made her chest ache. They saw romance where it was only transaction, believed in fairy tales while she was signing contracts. She smiled through their embraces and let them believe what they needed to believe. The wedding itself was a small, elegant affair at St. George's, Hanover Square, not the grand spectacle a duke's marriage usually commanded, but respectable enough to satisfy society's expectations. Rose wore ivory silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her frame. The duke wore black, severe and perfect, his expression as remote as it had been in her father's drawing room. When the vicar asked if she took this man, Rose heard her own voice as if from a great distance. I do. The words felt like a door closing. Clifton's response was steady, emotionless. I do. The ring he slipped onto her finger was exquisite. A band of platinum set with diamonds that caught the light like ice. Beautiful, cold, expensive. Exactly what one would expect from a duke fulfilling an obligation. Their kiss was brief, proper, and utterly devoid of feeling. The congregation applauded politely. Her father wept with relief. Her sisters sighed with romantic satisfaction. And Rose felt nothing but the weight of duty settling onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. The journey to Ashworth took the better part of a day, the Duke's crested carriage rolling through the countryside in near silence. Clifton sat across from her, reading correspondence, occasionally glancing out the window. He made no attempt at conversation. Rose was grateful for it. She had no words left, no energy for the pretense of companionship. As twilight descended, the carriage rounded a final bend, and Rose caught her first glimpse of her new home. Ashworth rose from the landscape like something from a medieval romance, all gray stone and soaring towers, ancient and imposing, surrounded by manicured grounds that stretched toward distant forests. It was magnificent. It was also utterly intimidating. 600 years, Clifton said without looking up from his papers. The keep has stood for 600 years. Every Duke of Ashworth has added to it, improved it, maintained it. You will be expected to do the same. Not a welcome, an assignment, The household staff assembled in perfect formation as they arrived. Butler, housekeeper, footmen, maids, all standing at attention like a well-trained regiment. Mrs. Daventry, the housekeeper, was a woman of perhaps 60 with sharp eyes and a ramrod-straight posture. She curtsied deeply to Rose. "Your Grace, welcome to Ashworth Keep. We are honored to serve you." Rose managed a gracious smile despite her exhaustion. "Thank you, Mrs. Daventry. I look forward to learning from you." Something in the housekeeper's expression softened fractionally approval, perhaps at the acknowledgment. Clifton addressed the staff with characteristic brevity. "The Duchess will tour the household tomorrow. See that everything is prepared. That will be all." Mrs. Daventry led Rose through corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, each more opulent than the last. Portraits of previous duchesses watched from gilded frames, their painted eyes following Rose's progress. She wondered if any of them had entered this house with as little hope as she carried now. "Your apartments, Your Grace," Mrs. Daventry announced, opening double doors to reveal a suite of rooms decorated in shades of cream and gold. A fire crackled on the hearth. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. It was beautiful, luxurious, and utterly foreign. "The Duke's apartments are in the east wing," the housekeeper continued, her tone carefully neutral. "Shall I have dinner sent up to you here? The journey has been long." The implication was clear. Separate wings. Separate lives. The coldness of the arrangement made tangible in architecture. "That would be most welcome, thank you." When Mrs. Daventry departed, Rose moved to the window overlooking the grounds. The sun had set completely now, leaving only the shadows of the vast estate visible against the darkening sky. Somewhere in the east wing her husband, she still could hardly form a word, was likely already immersed in his papers, his ledgers, his carefully ordered world that had no room for a wife beyond her practical function. A knock at the door startled her. A maid entered with a supper tray, followed by another carrying Rose's trunk. They worked in efficient silence, unpacking her modest belongings into the enormous wardrobe, laying out a nightgown that seemed absurdly innocent given the circumstances. When they left, Rose sat before the fire with her untouched supper, still wearing her traveling dress. Her wedding day. She should feel something, joy, nervousness, anticipation. Instead, she felt only a profound, hollow exhaustion. In her previous life, she had imagined marriage as partnership, companionship, perhaps even affection growing over time. Foolish dreams of a girl who hadn't yet learned the price of survival. Now she was a duchess, mistress of one of England's greatest houses, and more alone than she had ever been in her father's modest townhouse. The clock struck midnight. Somewhere in the east wing, the Duke of Ashworth was perhaps still awake, attending to his correspondence, his estates, his perfectly controlled existence. He would not come to her. She knew that with absolute certainty. Rose finally changed into her nightgown and slipped between the cool sheets of the enormous bed. The fire cast dancing shadows on the ceiling, and she wondered how many previous Duchesses of Ashworth had lain in the same bed, staring at these same shadows, feeling the same profound isolation. This was her life now, this beautiful, cold fortress, this polite, distant arrangement. She closed her eyes and willed herself not to weep. Rose discovered the library on her third morning at Ashworth Keep. Mrs. Daventry had been leading her through yet another series of state rooms when Rose paused at a set of carved oak doors, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name. "The ducal library, Your Grace," the housekeeper said. "His Grace spends most evenings there." Rose pushed open the doors and felt her breath catch. The room soared 2 stories high, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes. Tall windows flooded the space with morning light, and the scent of old paper and beeswax filled the air. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. "May I work here?" The words emerged before she could stop them. "For the household accounts, I mean." Mrs. Daventry's eyebrows rose fractionally. "The household accounts, Your Grace? I assume the estate requires regular review of expenditures, staff wages, maintenance costs. I should like to understand how Ashworth Keep operates." Rose kept her tone matter-of-fact, professional. "Unless His Grace prefers to manage such matters himself. His Grace reviews the quarterly summaries," Mrs. Daventry said carefully. "But the daily management has been somewhat neglected since the previous housekeeper's departure. I confess I would welcome assistance, Your Grace." By afternoon, Rose was ensconced at a massive mahogany desk. Ledgers spread before her like old friends. The numbers told stories, patterns of expenditure, inefficiencies in ordering, small economies that could be implemented without sacrificing quality. She had managed her father's household for years. This was simply a larger canvas. She was so absorbed in calculating grain costs that she didn't hear the door open. "You're in my chair." Rose's head snapped up. Clifton stood in the doorway, still in his riding clothes, his expression unreadable. She rose immediately, heat flooding her cheeks. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I didn't realize. There are 27 rooms in this house suitable for correspondence." His tone was cool, but something in his eyes seemed almost curious. "Why the library?" Rose gestured helplessly at the shelves surrounding them. Where else would one work, surrounded by so much accumulated wisdom? The faintest flicker of something crossed his features. Not quite a smile, but perhaps the ghost of one. He moved to the desk, glancing at her neat columns of figures. "You're reviewing the household accounts. With Mrs. Daventry's blessing. I hope that's acceptable." Rose clasped her hands to still their trembling. "I found several areas where costs might be reduced without impacting the household efficiency." Clifton picked up her notes, scanning them with the same focused intensity he applied to everything. The silence stretched. Rose prepared herself for dismissal, for the reminder that this was his domain, not hers. "Your mathematics are impeccable," he said finally, "and your conclusions sound. Implement them." He settled into a leather chair by the fire, not the desk chair, Rose noted, and picked up a book from the side table. The discussion, apparently, was concluded. Rose returned to her ledgers, hyper-aware of his presence. They worked in silence for perhaps an hour before she dared to glance up. He was completely absorbed in his reading, his severe features softened slightly by concentration. In that unguarded moment, he looked less like the cold duke who had proposed a loveless marriage, and more like a man seeking refuge in words. "Boethius," she said quietly, recognizing the spine of his volume. "The Consolation of Philosophy." His gray eyes lifted to hers, sharp with surprise. "You know Boethius? My mother believed a thorough education wasted on no one, regardless of their sex. I read him in Latin when I was 17. Rose hesitated. "Though I confess his arguments about fortunes will seem more philosophical than practical at the time. And now I understand why one might seek consolation in philosophy." The words emerged with more honesty than she'd intended. Something shifted in Clifton's expression. A crack in the ice, perhaps. The translation of the original? The original when I can access it. Translation loses the elegance of his argument. For the first time since their wedding, he truly looked at her. Not through her or past her, but at her. The third shelf, east wall. Complete Latin text, including a first edition of the Consolation. "You're welcome to it." "Thank you." Rose held his gaze, sensing the small offering was more significant than it appeared. "That's generous. It's practical. Books unread serve no purpose." But there was less coldness in his voice now, more consideration. They returned to their respective work. But something had shifted in the silence between them. It was no longer the brittle quiet of strangers, but something else, a tentative acknowledgement of shared ground. That evening established a pattern. Rose worked in the library each afternoon, managing the household accounts with increasing confidence. Clifton arrived in the early evening, settling into his chair by the fire. They rarely spoke, but occasionally one would make an observation about a book, and the other would respond. Brief exchanges, nothing profound, but they began to accumulate like interest in a ledger. 1 week into this arrangement, Rose arrived to find a slender volume placed deliberately on her desk. Cicero's letters, in the original Latin, with a pressed violet marking a particular passage. She read it and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Friendship improves happiness and abates misery by the doubling of our joy and the dividing of our grief. She looked up to find Clifton watching her from his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "I thought you might appreciate the rhetoric," he said. "Cicero's epistolary style is quite fine. It is—" Rose ran her fingers over the leather binding, understanding the olive branch he was extending. "Thank you for sharing it. The library belongs to both of us now," he said simply, then returned his own reading. It wasn't warmth. It wasn't love. But it was something other than coldness, and Rose found herself grateful for even that small thaw. She had entered this marriage expecting nothing. And yet here was Clifton Harden, the Duke of Ashworth, offering her access to his sanctuary, his books, his silence that was slowly becoming companionable rather than merely polite. Perhaps, she thought as she opened the Cicero, small considerations could be their own kind of conversation. Perhaps respect could be built in libraries and ledgers, in shared appreciation of ancient wisdom and the practical work of managing an estate. Perhaps this fortress wasn't quite as impenetrable as she had believed. The Dowager Duchess arrived on a crisp autumn morning, her carriage bearing the Ashworth crest in faded gold. Rose watched from the library window as Clifton descended the front steps to greet his mother, his posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. Even from this distance, Rose could sense the complicated tension between them. "Her Grace has requested tea with you in the Rose drawing-room at 3:00, Mrs. Daventry informed her, appearing at Rose's elbow. "She is exacting in her standards." The warning was clear enough. Rose spent the intervening hours in a state of quiet apprehension. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth was legendary in society, a woman of formidable intelligence and equally formidable opinions. She had ruled Ashworth Keep for 30 years before Clifton's father died, and by all accounts, she had not relinquished her influence lightly. At precisely 3:00, Rose entered the Rose drawing-room to find the Dowager seated like a queen holding court. She was perhaps 70, but age had diminished nothing of her presence. Her silver hair was dressed impeccably, her black silk gown cut in a style that acknowledged fashion without bowing to it. Her eyes, the same penetrating gray as Clifton's, assessed Rose with unnerving directness. "So," the Dowager said without preamble, "you are the woman my son married with such unseemly haste." Rose curtsied deeply, her heart hammering. "Your Grace, I'm honored to finally meet you. Sit, child. I cannot abide hovering." The Dowager's tone was imperious, but not unkind. "Pour the tea. Let us see if you possess any domestic competencies." Rose poured with steady hands, grateful for years of managing her father's household. She prepared the Dowager's cup exactly as requested. No sugar, a precise amount of milk, and offered without comment. The older woman sipped, nodded fractionally, and settled back into her chair. "You are older than I expected, more composed, less decorative. I am 28, Your Grace, well past the age of decoration." A sharp crack of laughter escaped the Dowager. "Well past the age of illusions, more like, good. My son has no patience for illusions." She paused, studying Rose over the rim of her cup. "I have been observing you both since my arrival. You work in the library together each evening. It wasn't a question, but Rose answered anyway. His Grace has been generous in sharing the space. Generous. The Dowager repeated the word as though tasting it. An interesting choice. Clifton is many things. Dutiful, intelligent, maddeningly reserved. But generous with his private sanctuaries? That is new. Her gaze sharpened. You must understand, he has not always been so isolated. There was a time when he believed in warmer things. Rose set down her teacup carefully. Your Grace, if you wish to tell me something, I would be grateful for plain speech. I have little talent for deciphering subtext. The Dowager's expression softened into something almost resembling approval. Very well. Plain speech, then. My son was engaged for 3 years ago. The woman was Lady Teresa Montclair, as she was then, beautiful, accomplished, from an excellent family. Clifton believed himself in love with her. He was... She paused, and for the first time, pain flickered across her aristocratic features. He was different then, less guarded. He smiled more readily, spoke of the future with something approaching hope. Rose's chest tightened. She thought of the cold man who proposed a marriage of pure convenience, who spoke only of duty and practicality. She could not imagine him hopeful. What happened? 2 weeks before the wedding, Clifton discovered Teresa in a rather compromising position with his closest friend, Lord Edmund Hartley. The betrayal was absolute, not merely of his heart, but his trust, his friendship, his belief in the basic decency of those he held dear. The Dowager's voice was clipped, controlled, but Rose heard the fury beneath it. Teresa showed no remorse. She informed Clifton that she had never loved him, had only pursued him for his title and wealth, and that Edmund at least provided her with passion, which Clifton apparently lacked. Rose felt physically ill. That's unspeakable. It was devastating. Clifton called off the engagement immediately. Of course. The scandal was significant. Teresa eventually married Edmund, and they moved in circles carefully separate from ours. The Dowager leaned forward slightly. But the damage was done. My son rebuilt himself into something harder, colder. He decided that emotion was a weakness to be excised, that marriage should be a matter of duty and practicality alone. No vulnerability, no risk, no possibility of such pain again. Rose understood now. The careful distance, the transactional proposal, the separate wings. Clifton hadn't been born cold. He had been wounded into it. Your Grace, why are you telling me this? Because I see the way he looks at you when you're absorbed in your ledgers. Because I notice the books he leaves on your desk. Because for the first time in 3 years, my son is allowing someone into his sanctuary, even if he doesn't realize it yet. The Dowager's gray eyes held Rose's with fierce intensity. You have a choice now. You can accept the cold bargain you made and live parallel lives of polite distance. Or you can be patient and kind and slowly show him that not everyone will betray his trust. I'm not certain I'm capable of healing such deep wounds, Rose said quietly. I'm not asking you to heal him, child. I'm asking you to simply be present. Be steady. Be yourself. The Dowager set down her cup with finality. Clifton chose you for practical reasons, yes. But I suspect, though he would never admit it, he also chose you because he saw something in you that felt safe. You understand sacrifice. You understand duty without self-pity. Perhaps that is exactly what he needs. Rose sat in silence for a long moment, absorbing this. She thought of the pressed violet in the Cicero, of Clifton's careful acknowledgement that the library belonged to both of them now. Small gestures from a man who had learned to trust nothing. I will be patient, she said finally, and kind, not because I expect anything in return, but because he deserves that much. The Dowager smiled, the first genuine warmth Rose had seen from her. Then perhaps there is hope for you both yet. The letter arrived 3 weeks into Rose's tenure as Duchess of Ashworth. Mrs. Daventry brought it to the library on a silver tray, her expression unusually tight. A correspondence from Lady Hartley, Your Grace. She requests permission to call this afternoon. Rose's hand stilled on her ledger. Lady Hartley, Teresa, her youngest sister, now married to Lord Edmund Hartley. The same Edmund Hartley who had destroyed Clifton's engagement, shattered his trust, stolen his former fiancée. The coincidence was no coincidence at all. Teresa had married the man who betrayed her new brother-in-law, and Rose had never fully understood why. Does His Grace know? Rose asked quietly. I took the liberty of informing him. He said the decision was yours to make. Of course he did. Clifton would not dictate her family relationships, no matter how poisonous they might be. It was a courtesy born of distance, not warmth. Tell Lady Hartley she may call at 3 o'clock. Rose spent the morning in a state of controlled dread. Teresa had always been the most beautiful of the Thomas sisters, the most ambitious and the least kind. Rose had funded her spectacular season, watched her capture Lord Hartley despite the scandal surrounding him, and wondered, always wondered, what her sister truly wanted. When Teresa swept into the blue drawing room at precisely 3 o'clock, she was resplendent in emerald silk, her dark hair dressed in the latest fashion, diamonds glittering at her throat. She was 23 and knew exactly how powerful her beauty was. Sister. Teresa's embrace was perfunctory, her smile sharp. How extraordinary to find you mistress of Ashworth Keep. When I heard the news, I could scarcely believe it. Teresa, you look well. Rose gestured to the settee. How is Lord Hartley? Edmund is in excellent health, though dreadfully busy with his estates. Teresa settled herself with practiced grace, accepting tea but not drinking it. We were both astonished by her marriage. The Duke of Ashworth, of all people. So sudden, so unexpected. Rose heard the implication beneath the words. So inexplicable that someone like you could capture him. His Grace required a duchess. I required security for our family. The arrangement was mutually beneficial. Arrangement. Teresa's laugh was musical and cruel. How very pragmatic. I suppose at your age, one cannot afford to be romantic. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Tell me, does he speak of her? His first engagement. Rose's teacup rattled slightly against its saucer. That is hardly an appropriate topic. Oh, come now. You must be curious. She was extraordinary, you know. Lady Teresa Montclair. Beautiful, accomplished, everything a duchess should be. Edmund still speaks of how desperately Ashworth loved her, how devastated he was when she chose passion over duty. The room felt suddenly airless. Rose set down her tea with deliberate care. Why are you here, Teresa? To see my eldest sister, of course. To congratulate you on your remarkable good fortune. Teresa's eyes glittered with something cold and calculating. Though I do wonder if His Grace ever looks at you and remembers what he lost. A duke doesn't forget his first love, Rose. Especially when he was forced to settle for something less. The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. Rose felt the words like physical blows, each one landing exactly where Teresa intended. On every insecurity, every doubt, every moment Rose had wondered why Clifton chose her. I think, Rose said, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest, that you should leave. Should I? Teresa rose gracefully. I'm only speaking the truth, sister. You've always been so practical, so resigned to your fate. I simply want to ensure you understand what this marriage truly is. A convenience for him, a rescue for you. Nothing more. Certainly nothing that could threaten what he felt for her. That will be quite enough. The voice cut through the room like a blade. Both women turned to find Clifton standing in the doorway, his expression carved from ice and fury. Rose had never seen him angry before. The effect was terrifying and magnificent. Your Grace. Teresa's composure faltered for the first time. I know precisely what you were doing, Lady Hartley. Clifton moved into the room with predatory grace. You were attempting to wound my wife with lies and insinuations based on gossip and your own malicious imagination. I meant no harm. You meant every harm. His voice was soft, deadly. Let me be absolutely clear. My first engagement ended because the woman in question lacked integrity, honor, and basic human decency. She pursued a title while conducting an affair with my closest friend, then had the audacity to claim I was insufficient. The devastation I felt was not for her loss, but for the loss of my own judgment in ever believing her worthy. Teresa's face had gone pale. My wife, Clifton continued, moving to stand beside Rose's chair, possesses more genuine quality in her smallest gesture than that woman had in her entire being. Rose is intelligent, competent, honorable, and has never once demanded more than was freely offered. If you believe I settle for less, Lady Hartley, then you understand nothing about true value. He placed his hand on Rose's shoulder, the first time he had voluntarily touched her since their wedding. The way of it was warm, solid, claiming, "You're no longer welcome at Ashworth Keep. Your carriage is waiting." Teresa stood frozen, humiliation and rage worn across her beautiful features. Edmund will hear of this. You cannot simply. Edmund Hartley has no standing to object to anything I do, and if you attempt to spread malicious gossip about the Duchess of Ashworth, you will discover precisely how far my influence extends. Clifton's gray eyes were merciless. Good day, Lady Hartley. When the door closed behind Teresa, silence flooded the room. Rose sat trembling, Clifton's hand still warm on her shoulder. She didn't dare look at him. Couldn't bear to see the distance return to his eyes now that the performance was over. Rose. His voice was gentler now. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his and found something there she had never seen before. Heat, intensity, something fierce and protective and utterly unexpected. Every word I spoke was true, he said quietly. You are not a consolation prize or a convenient solution. You are... He paused, seeming to struggle with words that didn't come easily to him. You are more than I deserve. Before Rose could respond, before she could think, Clifton cupped her face in both hands and kissed her, not the brief, perfunctory kiss of their wedding, but something real and deep and desperate, a kiss that tasted of defiance and claim, and 3 years of walls crumbling under the weight of genuine feeling. Rose's hands came up to clutch his coat, kissing him back with equal desperation, equal need. This was not duty. This was not arrangement. This was something entirely different, something that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clifton rested his forehead against hers. No one, he said fiercely, will ever make you doubt your place here again. Do you understand? Rose nodded, unable to speak past the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. For the first time since entering Ashworth Keep, she believed she might truly belong. The weeks following Teresa's departure unfolded with a quiet ease Rose had not anticipated. Something fundamental had shifted between her and Clifton. Not a sudden transformation into passionate devotion, but subtle warming, like frost gradually yielding to spring sun. They still maintained separate apartments, still observed the careful boundaries of their arrangement. But now, when Clifton entered the library each evening, he would pause at Rose's desk and ask about her day. Small questions, brief exchanges, but often with genuine interest rather than perfunctory politeness. Mrs. Daventry mentioned you've been reviewing the tenant contracts, he said one evening, settling into his customary chair by the fire. Rose looked up from her ledgers. Several families are struggling with rents after last season's poor harvest. I thought perhaps we might defer payment until spring when they can recover. She waited for objection, for a reminder of practicality and profit. Instead, Clifton nodded thoughtfully. A sound approach. Desperate tenants make poor stewards of the land. Defer the rents and have Mrs. Daventry ensure those families receive additional provision for winter. That's generous. It's practical, he said, but there was warmth in his voice now. You have good instincts for estate management. Better than mine, in some respects. The compliment, so simply offered, warmed Rose more than any grand gesture could have. It was the vicar who approached them about the orphanage. St. Catherine's had served the parish for nearly a century, but the building was crumbling, the funds desperately insufficient. During Sunday service, Clifton listened to the vicar's plea with his usual impassive expression, but Rose noticed his fingers tightening on his prayer book. Afterward, in the carriage returning to the keep, Rose ventured carefully. The orphanage situation is quite dire. It is... Clifton stared out the window at the rolling estate lands. I provided annual donations, but clearly it's insufficient for their actual needs. What if we did more? Rose turned to face him. Not just funds, but actual oversight. We could assess what's truly needed, repairs, supplies, perhaps even expand their capacity, make it a proper project. For the first time, Clifton looked directly at her, and something like surprise flickered in his gray eyes. You would want to be involved personally? I spent years managing my father's limited resources. I understand how to stretch funds effectively. Rose hesitated, and I think we could do genuine good. Together. The word hung between them. Together, not as Duke and Duchess fulfilling separate obligations, but as partners working toward a common purpose. Very well, Clifton said finally. We'll visit St. Catherine's tomorrow and conduct a full assessment. The orphanage was worse than either of them had imagined. The roof leaked. The heating system was barely functional, and 37 children lived in conditions that made Rose's heart ache. But the matron, Mrs. Fletcher, ran the institution with fierce dedication and meticulous record-keeping. Your Grace, she curtsied repeatedly, overwhelmed by their presence. We're honored, though I apologize for the state of... There's no need for apology, Rose said gently. We're here to help. May we see your accounts? Over the following weeks, Rose and Clifton threw themselves into the project with shared intensity. Rose managed the financial planning and supply procurement, while Clifton coordinated the builders and craftsmen. They spent long evenings in the library, working side by side, debating priorities and solutions. If we install the new heating system before winter, Rose argued, pointing to her calculations, it will cost more initially, but save significantly on fuel costs. But the roof repairs are critical, Clifton countered. A warm building with water damage serves no one. What if we prioritize the children's dormitory roof first, install heating there, then proceed with the rest of the building in phases? Clifton studied her figures, then looked up with something approaching a smile. That's actually brilliant. Their hands brushed as they both reached for the same document. The touch was brief, but neither pulled away immediately. Rose felt heat flood her cheeks, suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how intimate this shared work had become. Rose, Clifton said quietly, not moving away, I want you to know this project, working with you like this, it's the most satisfaction I've found in estate management in years. It feels meaningful, Rose agreed, knowing we're making a real difference. It's more than that. His voice dropped lower, more vulnerable. It's you, your perspective, your compassion, your competence. You make everything. He paused, seeming to struggle with the admission. You make everything better. Rose's breath caught. This was the closest he had come to expressing true affection, to acknowledging that their partnership had transcended its transactional origins. "Clifton," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. His hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "My life is better with you in it. I don't know when that happened, but it's true." This kiss was different from the fierce, defiant one after Teresa's visit. This was slow, tender, exploratory. A kiss between two people discovering that perhaps duty could transform into something warmer, something that felt remarkably like the beginnings of love. When they finally drew apart, Clifton rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I'm not certain I know how to do this properly. The affection part." "Neither am I," Rose admitted. "But perhaps we can learn together." "Together?" he echoed, and the words sounded like a promise. The orphanage project continued through late autumn. When they finally attended the reopening ceremony, watching 37 children explore their warm, safe, beautifully restored home, Rose felt Clifton's hand find hers. He laced their fingers together openly, publicly, claiming her not as a convenient duchess, but as his partner in every sense that mattered. That evening, when they returned to the keep, Clifton walked Rose to her apartment door, as he had every night since their marriage. But this time, he didn't immediately retreat. "Rose," he said, his voice rough with emotion and longing. "Would you, that is, if you're willing, I would very much like to not sleep in separate wings tonight." It wasn't a demand or an expectation. It was a question, an invitation, an acknowledgement that their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated but both now wanted. Rose answered by taking his hand and leading him inside. The fortress walls had finally fallen. What rose in their place felt infinitely stronger, not built from stone and duty, but from partnership, respect, and the tender beginnings of genuine love. Baron Thomas arrived at Ashworth Keep in early December with an entourage that would have been more appropriate for visiting royalty. Rose watched from the library window as 3 carriages disgorged her father, her 3 sisters and their husbands, ladies' maids, valets, and enough luggage to suggest they planned an extended stay. "They brought half of London," Clifton observed from beside her, his tone carefully neutral. "I apologize. I should have been more specific about the invitation." His hand found hers, squeezing gently. "They're your family. They're welcome here." But Rose felt the first flutter of unease in her chest. The past weeks had been precious, a private, quiet world where she and Clifton had discovered each other without interference. Now that fragile new intimacy would be tested by the very people she had sacrificed everything to protect. The first evening's dinner was pleasant enough, though Rose noticed her father's eyes constantly cataloging the silver, the paintings, the evidence of wealth that now technically belonged to his eldest daughter. Her sisters chattered about London gossip. Their husbands discussed politics, and Clifton maintained his usual reserved courtesy. It was the second day when the cracks began to show. "Rose, darling." Her father cornered her in the portrait gallery. "I've been meaning to discuss a small matter. There's an investment opportunity. Railways, very promising, and I thought perhaps you might mention it to His Grace. Just a modest sum, perhaps £5,000. Rose felt ice form in her stomach. "Father, the Duke settled all your debts. That was the arrangement." Of course. "And we're deeply grateful." He waved his hand dismissively. "But this is different. This is an opportunity. Surely Ashworth can spare such a trifling amount for his father-in-law. It's not appropriate for me to ask." "Not appropriate?" His jovial mask slipped slightly. "Rose, you're a duchess now. Surely you can manage your own husband. What good is this marriage if we can't benefit from?" "That's quite enough, father." Rose's voice was cold, her mother's voice. I will not impose upon His Grace's generosity. The subject is closed. Baron Thomas's face flushed. You become quite proud since marrying above yourself. Don't forget who sacrificed for whom in this family. The injustice of it stole Rose's breath. She had sacrificed everything, her inheritance, her prospects, her very future, and her father remembered none of it. Before she could respond, Clifton appeared at her elbow. Baron Thomas. I believe the gentlemen are gathering in the billiard room. Shall I show you the way? His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were steel. Her father, recognizing dismissal when he heard it, departed with forced cheerfulness. You heard? Rose said quietly, I heard. Clifton's jaw was tight. Your father is fortunate. I value your peace more than my own inclination to throw him out. But worse was yet to come. Teresa arrived the following afternoon, uninvited and alone. Rose found her in the morning room, taking tea with her other sisters as though she had every right to be there. Sister, Teresa's smile was poisonous sweetness. I hope you don't mind. I was simply dying to see how you're settling into married life. You were explicitly told you were not welcome here. Oh, that? Teresa waved her hand airily. Surely His Grace has forgiven that little misunderstanding. After all, we're family now, and I have such interesting news to share. Rose's sisters exchanged uncomfortable glances. They sensed the undercurrent, but lacked the context to understand it. There's a rumor circulating in London, Teresa continued, her eyes glittering with malice, about your marriage contract. Apparently, there's a clause, quite unusual, that allows the Duke to dissolve the marriage after 1 year if you fail to produce an heir. Did you know about that, Rose? The room went silent. Rose felt the blood drain from her face. That's a lie. Is it? Because my sources are quite reliable. Edmund heard it from His Grace's own solicitor. Teresa leaned forward. It makes sense, doesn't it? A practical man like Ashworth would want an escape clause from a marriage of convenience, especially if his aging bride proves unproductive. Rose's sisters looked horrified. Teresa, that's cruel. It's the truth. Our dear sister is on trial, you see, performing for her position. One wonders if all this newfound closeness is genuine, or simply the Duke ensuring his investment pays appropriate dividends. Rose stood, her hand shaking. Get out. Now. I'm only trying to help you see clearly. Out. Teresa departed with theatrical reluctance, but the poison had been planted. Rose's sisters tried to offer comfort, but she sent them away, needing silence to master the panic rising in her chest. Could it be true? Had their entire warming relationship been calculated manipulation? She thought of Clifton's tenderness, his admission that his life was better with her. Had it all been performance, ensuring his convenient bride remained compliant until he could legally discard her? That evening, Rose avoided dinner, claiming a headache. She stood at her apartment window, watching darkness fall over the estate, trying to sort truth from malicious fiction. It was then she heard voices from the terrace below. Clifton's and another man's, one of her brothers-in-law, perhaps. You must admit, Ashworth, it's quite the advantageous arrangement, the man said. An older bride, grateful for rescue, unlikely to cause you trouble. Rose's heart stopped. The marriage serves its purpose, Clifton replied, his voice carrying that familiar cool detachment she hadn't heard in weeks. And if she fails to provide an heir? A pause. Rose pressed closer to the window, desperate to hear. Then we'll address that when necessary. The contract is quite clear on all points. The conversation drifted away, but Rose remained frozen, Clifton's words echoing in her mind. The marriage serves its purpose. The contract is quite clear. Had she been fooling herself? Had she mistaken practiced kindness for genuine affection? She thought of their nights together, the tenderness she believed she'd seen in his eyes. Had it all been duty, ensuring his convenient arrangement remained functional? When Clifton came to her rooms later that evening, as had become their habit, Rose couldn't bring herself to let him in. "Rose!" He knocked gently. "Are you unwell?" "I'm tired, Your Grace. Perhaps it's best if we return to our previous arrangement tonight." The formality of "Your Grace" hung between them like a wall. A long silence followed. "Rose, what's happened?" "Nothing. I simply think we've been premature in certain aspects of our relationship. Good night." She heard him standing there, could feel his confusion and concern through the door, but she couldn't face him, not until she understood what was real and what was carefully maintained transaction. After a long moment, his footsteps retreated down the corridor. Rose sank onto her bed, wondering if she'd just destroyed the best thing that had ever happened to her, or if she'd finally seen the truth she'd been too hopeful to acknowledge. The invitation to the Devonshire Ball arrived like a summons, one of the season's most prestigious events. It would be Rose's first major appearance in London society as the Duchess of Ashworth. Under normal circumstances, she would have dreaded it. Now, with a chasm of silence stretching between her and Clifton, it felt like marching toward execution. They had maintained cold civility for the past week. Clifton retreated to his separate apartments without protest. Their conversations consisted of necessary household matters, delivered in tones of painful politeness. Rose caught him watching her, sometimes with an expression she couldn't decipher: hurt, confusion, perhaps anger. But he didn't demand explanations, and she couldn't bring herself to voice her fears. "We're expected to attend," Clifton said over breakfast the morning before their departure. "But if you prefer to remain at Ashworth Keep, I can make excuses." Rose looked up from her untouched toast. He looked tired, she realized. There were shadows under his eyes she hadn't noticed before. "I'll attend. It's my duty as your Duchess." Something flickered across his face at the word duty. "Of course. How practical of you." The word stung, though she couldn't say why. They traveled to London in strained silence, staying at Ashworth House in Mayfair. The townhouse was elegant and cold, much like their marriage had become again. Rose dressed for the ball with meticulous care, choosing a gown of midnight blue silk that made her look every inch a duchess, even if she felt like an imposter. When Clifton saw her, something softened in his expression. "You look beautiful." "Thank you, Your Grace." The formality was ablaze between them. His jaw tightened. "Rose, I don't understand what I've done to displease you, but I would appreciate. We're expected at 9. We should depart." The Devonshire ballroom blazed with candlelight and jewels, packed with the cream of society. Whispers followed Rose and Clifton's entrance. Speculation about the hasty marriage, the age difference, the mystery of how the forgotten Thomas sister had captured the elusive Duke. Rose held her head high, her hand light on Clifton's arm. He was a perfect escort, attentive without being warm, proper without being personal. To the world, they appeared the ideal couple. Inside, Rose felt hollow. It was perhaps an hour into the evening when Rose noticed the whispers growing more pointed. Ladies turned away as she approached. Conversations died when she drew near. Something had shifted, and Rose felt a familiar dread of social catastrophe approaching. She found out why when she overheard two matrons in the retiring room. Said the marriage contract includes a dissolution clause. If she doesn't produce an heir within the year, he can set her aside. How perfectly mercenary. Though what did she expect? Trapping a Duke at her age. Lady Hartley says the Duke still pines for his first love. This marriage is merely practical necessity. Rose's hands clenched in her skirts. Teresa, of course. Her sister had weaponized the rumors, spread them through society like poison. timed perfectly for Rose's debut as Duchess. When Rose returned to the ballroom, she found herself increasingly isolated. Dance partners made excuses. Conversation circles closed. Even women who had initially welcomed her now offered only cold civility. She stood near a pillar, watching Clifton across the room, and felt more alone than she had in her father's modest townhouse. Then she saw Teresa, resplendent in ruby silk, holding court with a group of influential ladies. Her sister caught Rose's eye and smiled, triumphant, vindictive, victorious. Rose turned to flee, unable to bear another moment, when a strong hand caught her elbow. "Where are you going?" Clifton's voice was low, intense. "I have a headache. I should return to—" "No." His grip tightened. "Tell me what's happening. Why have you been avoiding me? Why are you using that damned formal voice? Why?" He broke off, his gray eyes searching hers desperately. "Why did you stop letting me in?" Rose's composure cracked. "Because I heard you, on the terrace, talking about the marriage serving its purpose, about the contract being clear. And Teresa said there's a dissolution clause, and everyone's whispering that I'm on trial, that you're just waiting to—" "Stop." Clifton's voice was sharp. He glanced around the ballroom, seemed to come to a decision. "Come with me." He didn't wait for agreement, simply took her hand and led her directly to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra was between pieces. Conversation hummed around them. Clifton raised his hand, commanding immediate silence. Every eye turned toward them. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice carried across the ballroom with absolute authority, "it has come to my attention that malicious rumors regarding my marriage have been circulating through society. I will address them now publicly, so there could be no further misunderstanding." Rose's heart pounded. What was he doing? "There is no dissolution clause in my marriage contract," Clifton continued. "No provision for setting aside my wife, no trial period, no escape. The contract is absolutely standard in every respect." His eyes found Teresa in the crowd, and his voice turned deadly. "Anyone claiming otherwise is spreading deliberate lies." Teresa's face went white. Clifton turned to Rose, taking both her hands in his, speaking to her but loud enough for everyone to hear. "I married you because I needed a duchess. That is true. But I fell in love with you because you are brilliant, compassionate, honorable, and you make every aspect of my life immeasurably better. The conversation you overheard was me deflecting inappropriate questions from your brother-in-law. I said the marriage serves its purpose because I was too proud to admit publicly to a man I barely know that it serves far more than that." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Clifton, I love you, Rose." His voice dropped lower, but in the absolute silence of the ballroom, everyone heard. "I fought it because I was afraid, because I'd been hurt before, and I swore never to be vulnerable again. But you made me want to try. And this past week, without you has been agony." He released one of her hands to reach into his coat, withdrawing a small velvet box. "I should have done this properly. I should have told you what you mean to me instead of assuming you knew." Inside the box was a ring, not diamond this time, but a deep red ruby surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like fire. "This belonged to my grandmother," Clifton said. "It's traditionally given to the woman the Duke of Ashworth loves beyond reason. I meant to give it to you on our anniversary, but I can't wait another moment." He looked up at her, and Rose saw fear and hope and desperate love in his eyes. "Will you accept it? Will you accept me, not as a convenient arrangement, but as a husband who loves you absolutely?" Rose couldn't speak past the emotion choking her. She simply nodded, tears streaming down her face as Clifton slid the ruby ring onto her finger beside the platinum band. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her in front of 500 members of the ton. A kiss that left no doubt about his feelings, about the authenticity of their marriage, about who Rose Thomas truly was to the Duke of Ashworth. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom erupted in applause. Rose saw Teresa flee, her humiliation complete. She saw her father looking stunned. She saw the Dowager Duchess in the corner, wiping tears from her eyes with a satisfied smile. But mostly, she saw Clifton, looking at her like she was everything he'd ever wanted and never thought he'd find. "Take me home," she whispered. "To Ashworth Keep?" he asked. "No, wherever you are. That's home." Spring arrived at Ashworth Keep with a gentleness that felt like benediction. The gardens bloomed in riots of color. The lake reflected cloudless skies, and the ancient stone walls seemed warmed not merely by sun, but by the happiness contained within them. Rose woke on the morning of their first anniversary to find Clifton's side of the bed empty, though still warm. They had long since abandoned the pretense of separate apartments. Most mornings, she woke to find him reading beside her, or watching her with an expression of quiet wonder, as though he still couldn't quite believe she was real. A note rested on his pillow in his precise handwriting. "Meet me by the lake at 10 o'clock. Wear something beautiful. See." Rose smiled, tracing the single initial with her finger. He signed his personal notes to her that way now. Just see. Intimate and private, a small rebellion against the formality he maintained with the rest of the world. Mrs. Daventry helped her dress in a gown of palest ivory silk, embroidered with spring flowers. Simple, elegant, and suited for whatever mysterious plans her husband had devised. The housekeeper's eyes were suspiciously bright as she arranged Rose's hair. "His Grace has been planning this for weeks, Your Grace. So careful about every detail. You know what he's arranged?" "I do." Mrs. Daventry's smile was warm. "And I'll only say that you should bring a handkerchief. For happy tears." Rose walked to the lake through gardens she had come to love, past the orphanage wing that bore a discreet plaque reading the Rose and Clifton Children's Home, and down to the water's edge where willows trailed their branches in gentle blessing. Clifton stood beneath an arch woven with white roses and ivy, dressed in dark blue superfine, looking impossibly handsome and slightly nervous. Beside him stood the vicar from St. Catherine's, holding a prayer book, his kind face wreathed in smiles. Rose's breath caught. "Clifton?" He came forward, taking both her hands in his. "A year ago today, we stood in St. George's and exchanged vows that meant nothing beyond a practical arrangement. I've regretted that ceremony every day since I realized I loved you. So today I thought we might do it again. Properly this time." Rose's vision blurred with tears. "You want to renew our vows?" "I want to marry you, Rose. Not as a duke securing a convenient duchess, but as a man who cannot imagine his life without you. If you'll have me." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ceremony was simple and perfect. No grand assembly, no watching eyes, just the two of them beneath the sky, speaking words that held all the love the first ceremony had lacked. Clifton Harden, take you, Rose Thomas, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady but his eyes bright with emotion. "Not because duty demands it, not because practicality requires it, but because loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. I promise to cherish you, honor you, and remind you daily that you are worthy of every happiness. This I vow with all that I am." Rose's hands trembled in his as she spoke her own vows. "I, Rose Thomas, take you, Clifton Harden, to be my husband. You saw worth in me when I had forgotten it existed. You gave me not just security, but partnership, respect, and a love I never dared to dream possible. I promise to stand beside you, to be your refuge as you have been mine, and to love you with everything I am. This I vow forever." Clifton reached into his pocket and withdrew a third ring, for she wore both the platinum band of duty and the ruby of public declaration. This new ring was rose gold, delicate and warm, set with a single perfect diamond that caught the light like captured starfire. "This," he said softly, "is the love ring, not given out of necessity or drama, but simply because today marks 1 year of the most profound joy I have ever known. Because you transform my fortress into a home. Because every morning I wake grateful that you chose to stay." He slid it onto her finger, and Rose watched through tears as 3 rings caught the sunlight. Duty, declaration, and devotion. "You may kiss your bride," the vicar said with gentle humor. Clifton pulled Rose into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that felt like coming home. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being patient with me, for seeing past my walls, for loving me despite how badly I fumbled this at the beginning. Thank you for choosing me," Rose replied, "for teaching me that I was worthy of being chosen." They spent the afternoon by the lake, talking and laughing, sharing a picnic that Mrs. Daventry and the staff had prepared. Clifton told Rose about the trust he had established for St. Catherine's, ensuring its future in perpetuity. Rose told him about the letters she received from tenant families, thanking them for their compassion during difficult seasons. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clifton pulled Rose close, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her waist. "I have something to tell you," Rose said quietly. "Something I discovered a few days ago." She felt him tense slightly. "What is it?" Rose took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child. In the autumn." For a long moment, Clifton said nothing. Then she felt his chest shake with emotion, felt him press his face against her hair. "Rose." His voice was thick with tears. "Are you certain?" "The physician confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to wait until today to tell you." He turned her in his arms, and Rose saw his face transformed with joy. No guardedness, no reservation, just pure, unfiltered happiness. "A child," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our child. Are you pleased?" "Pleased." He laughed, the sound bright and free. "Rose, I'm terrified and ecstatic, and more grateful than I have words to express." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything. A home, a purpose, love, and now this. How did I ever believe a practical arrangement would be sufficient? Because neither of us knew what we needed," Rose said. "We thought we understood ourselves, but we needed each other to become whole."
Thank you so much for watching. Your support truly means everything to me. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It only takes a second but helps immensely in bringing you more content like this. I've got another compelling video ready for you. Just click on it now to continue. See you in the next one.